All right, welcome everybody. Happy Monday. Let me just get my chat going here. Make sure everybody. Hey, Eric, welcome. Welcome. Make sure you can everybody hear, see. Just give us a thumbs up in chat, and I'll give it a minute or so here, just while we're waiting for a few minutes. Garrett, Phyllis, thanks for filling in last Monday. I got to hear a little bit of it from the airplane. It was really cool.
Did you hear the beginning? I said we're going to have an extra 10 minutes of call because there's no announcements.
That's awesome. But it sounded great. I mean,
yeah, Tyler and Mark did a great job. I sent it out. That one I sent out as my weekly audio message to all my peer members.
Oh, neat.
Because you get to hear about their journey in business, but also like Phyllis, I thought they did a good job of like weaving in the impact of cybersecurity as such a huge lever in their success.
I agree. I mean, I think it was great to hear like, hey, it wasn't like, hey, we're great. It was like, we weren't great. We had nothing. And what we did was we looked internal first,
mm-hmm.
And then it was critical for them to hire certain roles. And in some sense, like it wasn't easy. It was a culture shift. It was, I like how they talked about, the reality of the situation, and like having that role was important. And it also, in my opinion, shows commitment, right?
It does. So Andrew, they talked about that they were working, trying to mature. And at one point they made the investment in bringing on someone, with, more cybersecurity background than anybody on the team, but not just the knowledge, but made that person accountable. And like, that was like a turning point in terms of changing their culture, because there was someone who was accountable in all areas that things move forward. So I thought that was a good call out, Phyllis.
Yeah.
I think, and some of the things I picked up from 33,000 feet, Gary, as it went in and out, but they definitely spoke about roles and process. And I think, Phyllis, you called something out that I think is really important. You typically, and I'll ask Lawrence about this to confirm, in my years of doing this, you typically know an MSP is on the fairway, Gary, in cybersecurity when they talk about they were nowhere and they struggled, and talk about the process of getting better at it, and that they're still not probably where they want to be. Then you're talking to somebody with maturity. It's when you ask somebody about their cybersecurity journey or where they are, and they start talking about tools, that's when they're very early in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, everybody, I think, unless you started your business, you came out of somewhere else that already had that culture, and then you started your business in the past 2 to 3 years. Anyone other than that who's been in business longer has had to go on this journey. Like, that's just the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The cool thing is, Gary, and we've highlighted a lot on this, we've now in our 5th season, is that, post-COVID, man, it really gave this boon. Like, if you rode this journey of maturity, right, and you were in an MSP that was dedicated to process going into it, like, I picture riding a wave. Like, you were riding the wave in 2018, 2019, and had roles, process, you were starting to, align to a framework, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's why, companies like Pace and a lot of the ones you've been involved with have been able to, if they wanted to exited pretty substantially.
Yeah, absolutely. Or have way better businesses. And I feel like it's going to happen faster this time, but we're at the beginning of that same impact with automation.
Very true.
It's going to happen faster than cybersecurity, and the revenue upside. Like, it's not just our current streams adding to it, but it's going to be new revenue streams, which changes the TAM dramatically. And I think that is going to be part of it. And again, it's intertwined with security.
Yeah, I agree. Really good point. All right, so let's get on into it today. Give it a few minutes here to let people get in. And Carl, if you're asking about last week's session, all the sessions are in the live feed of YouTube.
I think what he's saying is that he opened a link, and instead of coming to this, it pointed him to last week's session, is what he's saying.
Oh, wow. Huh.
The link that must have been sent out was.
I'm sorry about that, Carl.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So last week, again, if you were here, like I said, it was a fantastic session talking about, an organization that their entire journey, right? How they acquired and merged with a company, then they just went through being acquired by a company that Gary's on the board of. And they talked about the role security played in that process. Today, I wanted to I double click, as it were. And there's two things that I wanted to talk about today. Both, ironically, Phyllis is going to be a bit of a guest star today, as well as Lawrence, who I'll let introduce himself momentarily. And that is, well, first I'm going to talk about this guide to reasonable cybersecurity and the role it's starting to play in corporations. I think it's important for our community to hear about this, how they might be able to leverage it. And then also, since Lawrence has been arguably one of the most vested MSPs in the CIS controls, the first to go fully through the CIS accreditation process. We wanted to talk about that journey and how it's setting him apart as well. So with that, Lawrence, I think everybody knows Phyllis, so I'm going to skip that intro, but I think this is your first time on
It is.
CyberCall, so welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little about yourself and your MSP.
Oh, sure. First, it's fantastic to be on this side of the CyberCall. For everyone that is watching this, the fact that this is everyone's community, right? I mean, Andrew and you and your team have done an amazing job of making this truly a community effort, where it's the voices of this amazing community. So it's awesome. It's great to be here. So a little bit of background on me. My name is Lawrence Cruciana. I'm the founder and president of Corporate Information Technologies in Charlotte, North Carolina. Started the business back in the late 90s, 98. And it was a very, very different organization than it is today. We have and continue to serve mostly regulated entities, regulated industries, a lot in finance, a little bit in pharma, a lot of defense, and non-regulated organizations that have high value intellectual property, so that cybersecurity really is central to their culture and their values. For a very long time, I was the charter member of the Uncool Kids Club, in the fact that everything we did was centered around this crazy thing that we now have of cybersecurity. So while the rest of the
MSPs,
there are definitely cool MSPs. I like to think that we're one of them now, but there are a lot of cool MSPs. But no, really, it was one of the, while the rest of the industry was we make it easy, just plug it in and everything just magically works. We're like, oh, that's not going to be the experience you have with us. Nothing is going to work. It's going to be authorization based. There's a completely contrary to the rest of the industry, but it really reflected back to our journey and the genesis of the company, where we started the business. I started the business serving enterprise organizations. Those that are Fortune 100 companies, we were serving inside of their supply chain, and those shenanigans didn't fly. And over the course of time, we moved into the upper end of small and all of mid market, which is where we sit today.
How many people on your team?
22 people.
Gotcha.
So
nice.
small MSP.
Well, 22 employees is, and there's some big ones now, but 50, 60% are, under 10 or more, could be 70%. So
Good point. That's
good
very
job.
true.
Congratulations on your business.
Thank you.
Lawrence, just a quick question before I turn it over to Gary. He's got some questions to ask Phyllis about the reasonableness, but I am curious because of your focus in CMMC, is it are with the ruling and finally things starting to get going, is it kicking up in terms of workload for you?
It is. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Andrew. Yeah, we're actually in line to be the first, if not one of the first, right? Certified MSPs inside of CMMC. The final rule goes officially into effect December 16th, and our assessment begins at 12:01 a.m. on December 16th. So we are. No, it's wild, right? I mean, right, I have long been a proponent of like, put up, show up, like be present in the world that we choose to live. We chose and have chosen to live inside of regulated industries, and it's core to our culture that that we're going to be on the leading edge of these things, much to the chagrin of most of my team, because I know, like, even when the CIS accreditation was first announced, I'm not sure. I don't even think it had been officially published on the CIS website, and I was like, "Hey, Phyllis, count me in." And not knowing anything about what the requirements were, but we've used the CIS controls for back before it was the CIS controls, back when it was the SANS project. We've used it for a very long time, and I said, you know what, it's our North Star. We really should, for the benefit of the organization, we should be willing to be the first one. And the same thing inside of CMMC. We serve inside of all of the major primes inside of their supply chain, and I think we owe it to our clients to have a 800-171 compliant system and be able to be entrusted inside of their supply chain. And so as soon as there was the ability for certification, I did the same thing. I'm like, all right, count us in. We're gonna do this. So it is definitely picking up. I think as the final rule kind of congeals and people start getting get past the CMMC deniers. There was a lot of that, and now that we have clarification of the relationship between MSPs or ESPs, as they are, and CMMC, and the OSCs, the organizations that are subject to it, I think as that kind of, now we have some clarity on it, there's a lot more certainty, so people can use that certainty to move forward and make business plans.
Yeah, we can't even agree on what shape the Earth is. So.
I'll tell you, Gary. It is amazing. I just came back from a CMMC conference last week, and the level of intellectual prowess that is just poured into the final rule. Every comma, period, like every word and every intention that is there has been scrutinized and analyzed and compared to other rules. And I'm like, man, like, you all that's way above my pay grade. I'm going to take it for what the requirements are, and we're going to go with what it states the requirements are. But there is so much consideration that's gone into this, and I'm like, man, like at the end of the day, let's just agree that this is what the DoD. Right? Like, this is what the DoD wants. So we're going to have to pursue that. All of this other nuance and fine point detail, if it matters to your business, great. Go to that extent. But for the rest of the 99%, let's just agree with what it says and move on.
So, Andrew, people are commenting that you two, and it is distracting that you guys have the same background. Like on screen.
It's just a virtual background.
Yep.
I'll see if there's another one to make everybody
Hilarious.
less.
I saw that. I was like, yeah, Andrew invited me to his beach house.
All right, so I'm going to start off here with Phyllis. Phyllis, you've been around the cybersecurity place for a long time, even though you're a very young woman.
Thank you. True. Facts.
Yep. Give us a quick rundown on what CIS reasonable cybersecurity guide is, and why you think it's become a critical resource, or do you think it's become a critical resource?
Yeah, sure. So just some background. So what we've been seeing, we monitor, of course, federal law, executive orders, as well as state law and state legislation to monitor what is it that cybersecurity is going to look like, what's being mandated, and that helps us. That informs us on what kind of products that we create, because of course we always want to stay relevant. What we saw is in 6 states, they created safe harbor laws, meaning that if you implement a cybersecurity framework, they were incentivizing the implementation of a cybersecurity framework in order to get safe harbor. So you either could get indemnified from a high fine if you're breached, or you can only get sued up to a certain amount. And all of these states said, you had to have implemented a reasonable cybersecurity program. And of course, CIS, critical security controls, was one of the frameworks mentioned. And then, of course, no one defined reasonable. Just kind of like we always talk about cyber hygiene, no one defined cyber hygiene. So what is it that you can do to achieve cyber hygiene, which is why we defined essential cyber hygiene. But the same thing was reasonable. What does it mean to reasonably implement a cybersecurity framework? And so that's why we recreated the reasonableness guide to guide folks. And what I like about how we created it, because we got to use a community, because that's how we create all our guidance. We had lawyers who have gone to court about cybersecurity, expert witnesses who are also lawyers, as well as a judge. So we could say, hey, how is it that this should be worded to help not just a consumer, like an organization, but lawyers and judges to interpret what does the law mean? Because reasonable is kind of while it's a legal term, it's loosely defined right now for cybersecurity. We talk about a reasonable defense, like in the physical world.
So basically, are you saying like this is really the beginning of trying to put some guidelines like around what's reasonable?
Yes, when implementing
like
a
trying to
cybersecurity.
attach something to that definition for cybersecurity.
Yes, so we defined it in the paper. Yep.
Yeah,
And
that's good. And so like that's how everything starts, right? There has to be some starting point that people can have discussions around, agree with, disagree, fight in court, whatever it might be.
Yep. Exactly. And that's why I think it was so critical. We had lawyers and judges. I'm sorry, what?
When was this?
We did it last year. We wrote it last year. It was published, I think, in the summer or in the spring of last year. Yep.
And one thing I'll throw in, there was actually Tony Sager with CIS did an excellent panel on this at RSA last year, and it was fascinating to hear 2 jurists or 2 judges comment about how absolutely clueless they were about what cybersecurity was and how difficult it is as a jurist to make any rule or like reasonable application of law to an area and practice that they have so little professional training about. And I know that conversation really opened my eyes around like to all of us here. Like we might say a reasonable cybersecurity is that you change your password once a year. But to others, changing your password every 60 days is reasonable. And as a jurist, there was literally no basis for them to pull anything from.
It's not like
fascinating.
It's not like even judges deal with like malpractice. At this point, they've been through so many cases and so many expert witnesses, and it's so much better defined, even though it's still complicated and they're not doctors, but they can get there because they've had decades of experience with it.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
But Gary, Lawrence's point, and Lawrence, I put the URL in the chat of Tony's.
Perfect. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that's an internal chat. But Gary, this goes, not that I'm going to go down this path, but if this doesn't hammer the importance of having your legalese in your MSP between you and your clients really well defined, I mean, like I can't underscore what does. And they,
100%. Yet I don't know.
Yeah.
I ask people, how many people here have looked at and updated their MSA with someone who understands the cybersecurity impact? And you'll be surprised, Andrew, how many just have not addressed it. They have basically the same MSA, or they don't have one, or they've had the same one for 3 to 5 years. And you are completely at risk if that's the case.
it's the reason that case that Eric Tilt was asked to talk about in several publications about land tech, the MSP in California, who is being sued by their customer, who is a law firm, north of $1 million, right? Because what they had in place was very loose. And if you leave things loose in interpretation in a court of law, whoa. To Lawrence's point, and I'll let you get on, Gary, here. I mean, you want somebody that has this much knowledge of our industry making a decision, because that's pretty much what you're doing.
Yep.
So, Phyllis, this is the lens by which you see, right, the world. So with that and what you've learned being on this call the past 5 years, what's the main thing organizations like MSPs and IT departments, what's the top few things they're getting wrong when it comes to cybersecurity when you look through that lens, that reasonable lens?
Right. So the number one thing and we've done studies here with the MSISAC, we know that if you actually implement a cybersecurity framework, whichever one you choose, you're
saying even one of the lesser ones.
Yeah. Even one of the ones that aren't that, exactly. Start somewhere. Of course, I have my preference. But you should, number one, follow a cybersecurity framework. Doing it on your own with your feels and hey, I know this is a good idea, is a bad idea. Number one thing you should do is follow a cybersecurity framework. Number two is document, right? You must understand why you implemented, how you implemented, what process you have in place to implement a control, and you must document why you didn't implement that control, right? So you could say, I didn't conduct a pen test because it would bankrupt my business. And that's good enough, right? Did you make a reasonable choice at the time? Yeah. If you're going to say you're going to go out of business, that's reasonable. And that's defensible in a court of law.
Or as an example, a lot of times, Gary, like with, you talk about, things like, with the OT or, antiquated manufacturing equipment, and you're running Windows 98 or Windows 95. It's like, hey, we have this compensating control. Well, why didn't you upgrade it? Well, because it costs $4 million to retrofit it and would put us out of business.
Right.
So we put this compensating control in place for this highly antiquated system. Fair, Phyllis?
That's 100% fair. We also talk about if you put in a compensating control, that also is good enough. So what you have to do is you have to at least document that you thought about it and you made a quote unquote reasonable decision at that time, right? And then you're constantly revisiting that decision every year or every 6 months, whatever your cadence may be.
So a couple points here. One, something else that stood out last week when we were talking to Tyler Sanders from PACE. The one thing he said that when they implemented change control, that was the hardest thing.
Yep.
Because at that point, they were actually holding themselves accountable, like you said, for this. And that was like a big, like an eye opener for everyone who thought that I guess they thought they were doing pretty good until they did that. And they realized how much work it was and how many things, it uncovered. And I think the same thing happens the first time people start to, and Phyllis, right? I literally built my IT process before the standards, right? We were having people, and we were developing standards until the other standards came along. And because there's no way without a comparison across your client base to a set of standards There's
Yep.
no scenario where you're doing the right thing. Like you can't. It's like I call it the box and the blob, and the box is the standard. And if you have 50 customers, all you have is 50 blobs.
Right.
Right. It is the box that allows you to communicate with customers, because they understand what's in and out of that box and can attach a risk to it. So it's huge. The next question I have for you is, you emphasize reasonable, and you started to allude at this, but maybe dive a little bit deeper into, in this context, how an organization kind of like, they have to balance security with practicality, that their customer or customers have to do business.
Exactly. And so, reasonable is, is kind of loose or left open to interpretation for a reason, right? And that's why we wanted to say, let's draw the line in the sand and say, what is reasonable? So if you look at those, someone said there are 6 laws. There's 6 laws. And, there's also a ton of privacy law, which we'll go into later. But even within the law, when you look at those 6 laws, they talk about the fact that, you have to protect, security and confidentiality. You have to protect against threats and hazards. You have to make sure people's privacy information isn't leaked. But even within that, you have to take into consideration the size of the organization, what your organization is supposed to do, the sensitivity of the data that needs to be protected, and the resources that organization has to dedicate to cybersecurity. So even the law recognizes that there's a disparity in the organizations that have to implement cybersecurity. So we have to be understanding of that. But again, what is reasonable in that context?
Phyllis, quick question. Since CIS is so involved with CIS, and obviously you're the home of the MSISAC, you're bringing all of this to light, these disparities, these states having contradictory things, but you guys kind of putting a line in the sand about what's reasonable. Is this CIS? Have you heard anything? Hey, maybe we should put the federal standards in place, since we're seeing the need for commonality here. Is
right. So this is typically what happens. If you were to look at federal law and federal and the executive orders and those that do pertain to cybersecurity, and we actually have a graphic in the paper, what you'll see is most of those statutes or most of that legislation has to do with a certain vertical, like
CMMC.
Yeah, CMMC, or like Sarbanes-Oxley, like health,
FISMA,
financial,
right.
FISMA, or if you want to do, which FISMA is an example of, if you want to do business with the federal government,
right?
FedRAMP, FISMA, those kinds of things. And so that's like that top-down approach, but it's only been concentrated in those areas. Lacking a federal standard, what did the states do? You've got every state has state privacy law. And now you're seeing these safe harbor laws. And of course, there's these breach laws where you have to inform organizations of a breach. And so, we discussed this. What ends up happening is, once the state law gets to a certain point, what is that tipping point? Then you'll have this national law. Now, ONCD, Office of National Cyber Defense, also put out an RFI for, hey, we're getting a lot of feedback that everyone wants one standard. Now, we all sit back and we're like, ha, we all knew that, right? But then down the pike, which is kind of like a reinterpretation of the 171. So, and so, ONCD has put out, something to say, hey, we heard you, people want just one standard. What could that one standard be? Of course, we responded, as CIS, but that's a long-winded answer to say, yeah, we're not at that tipping point. We'll see the uprising in the state, not an uprising, but, we'll see an uptick in the state legislation, and then the federal government, hopefully this new administration, if it gets to a certain point, will do something.
So you alluded to this about every state has different, requirements right now. Like, what does that mean to an MSP? Like, many MSPs today, more than ever, are doing business with companies in many states.
Yes.
Right. We're not as tied geographically. I was here, and my MSPs were in New Jersey and Philadelphia, like basically along the Delaware. So we're only really dealt in 2 states. But now, you could deal in 5, 6, 7, 20 different states. Like, how does that patchwork impact, you think, MSP and also SMBs that have locations in multiple states?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very confusing, right? And organizations don't know which way to go and what to do. And so I think, one of the reasons why we felt like it was a tipping point for the reasonableness guide is that when you look at the state legislation, and there's lots of states that have this kind of legislation waiting in the works. We thought the great state of Florida was going to be the next one, but the governor punted on signing it. So we're hoping it'll come around again. So see what you can do about that, Andrew.
Are we talking about marijuana or cyber? Because marijuana got voted down, Phyllis.
Cybersecurity. So anyway, I think the guidance is because also, we heard a lot also because of the different state privacy laws, right? A lot of organizations, like financial organizations, and insurance organizations are like, oh, we're multi-state, and then of course we're nation. What do we do? And I would say, really follow the guide, because you really need to have that cybersecurity framework as your North Star, as Lawrence says, that you're using, so that you can actually prove that you have done something reasonable in order to, show if you are breached, I reasonably protected people's data.
Garrett, quick question to you. As you hear this, for MSPs dealing with non-regulated customers, how might you use this? Like, hey, this thought on reasonableness, right, and defensibility. Would that potentially be a wedge and a talk track for you in the sales process?
Yeah, I would. In my, I would have that as part of how I talk to my customers. The same way we want to have, assume breach. Like, these are all the kind of concepts and words you need to have with every customer. Because the fact of the matter is, many MSPs, they have some regulated customers to some degree, or people that require a higher level of support, like Tyler talked about, half his company's legal vertical. Right. Well, that costs money. You now really need to charge all your customers pretty much the same. It's like it's very hard to deliver a different service to two different levels of customers.
Oh,
There's pieces of it you can add on that lend themselves to it. But in terms of your core offering, you need now to be able to use what you're doing for those other customers to explain to every customer. It's like, listen, as soon as anyone who cares looks at people who really care about their data and don't want to breach, here's what they deem as reasonable. You're not in that industry, but isn't it just as reasonable? Isn't your data and your risk just as the same as a lawyer? Do you know what I'm saying? It's really almost no different.
Yeah.
One thing I'll throw in here, I think, and I'm glad you mentioned the insurance industry, right? The insurance business, they are professional risk mitigators, right? They identify all of these things at a macro level, and then their contract language gets updated accordingly on a very regular basis. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't looked at their business E&O policy or their business cyber policy recently to go back and look at it. And the insurance industry has pushed this out, where they defined their own level of reasonableness despite what the state laws were, and often in conflict with some of the state minimum requirements. They've defined their own set of reasonableness, because like they know, if you implement multi-factor authentication, a X% of these attacks are just completely moot. And I think that is something that as an MSP, we can look to that. And surely we direct our clients to do the same thing. Like, look at your insurance policies, all of those exclusions, all of those things, all those requirements, all those questionnaires that they send you every year. There's a reason behind that. And if you can't answer yes to all of the questions, right, in the affirmative that we're doing these things, then are you accepting the risk that someone else is at least telling you that you have here? And I think as MSPs, we can be the ones that can share what those risks are, because we do have a little more visibility into this than most.
Yeah.
Last thing real quick, because I have time, Gary, but really important one. If you haven't seen the conversation Gary had with Brian Blakely. I think he highlighted it best, Gary. If you recall the conversation, regardless of regulated or non-regulated, Lawrence, he spoke about ask your customers if you can look at the contracts between them and their largest customers.
That's a great point.
I'm paraphrasing, and he's like, there's a treasure trove of things in there that your clients probably signed off on that they have no clue about: data privacy, data security, breach notifications, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So even the customers or prospects that push back and go, yeah, but we're not regulated, we don't need this, that. Okay, let's talk about your largest piece of your revenue that you would you be willing to risk, right? Your biggest customers. Let's look at what you've signed up for there.
That's an incredible point, Andrew, and like even the point you just made there, like breach notification, like breach has a formal legal term, right? It has a very clear legal definition that's generally accepted, but what constitutes an incident, what constitutes a breach? There's a lot of contracts that have language in there that moves that line. And to your point, right? If as an MSP you don't know that, and if your customer doesn't know that in their contracts, man, that is a I'll use your words, that's a treasure trove right there.
I'm going to guess that a very, very small percentage of MSPs have gotten to that point where their relationship is with their customers, that they're having those conversations. And look, I you know how I can tell that there's a lot of Captain Obviouses still out there. I watch what happens right now around non-recurring revenue, non-recurring services as a percentage of MRR. I see it declining. And the reason why is you move the Exchange server to the cloud once. You don't do it again, right? But what NRR has been changing since the beginning of time? It's just changing faster. So that tells me, Andrew, they don't have a relationship where they're finding the other and new services to recommend. They're falling behind because it's being exposed now. Because the one thing they could depend on was a refresh cycle. And you don't need to know much about people's businesses for a refresh cycle. And to me, that tells me there's a security risk. Because those same questions that generate additional revenue are the ones that secure and reduce risk for our customers.
Yeah, Gary, and you pointed out whether it's security or governance, right? Data governance within security, privacy, or as you spoke about, immaturity and automation, because you're seeing the most mature MSPs now start, that have very solid security practices. They're starting to pull away now with automation practices.
Yes.
And I would say, regardless of whether or not you're in a regulated industry, if you live in a state, you're subject to that state's privacy law. If you live in one of these other states, you can benefit from these safe harbor laws. There is this growing expectation that my data is private. And so, MSPs need to understand that people are expecting that my email isn't read by a stranger, that my credit card data isn't compromised, like all these things. There is that growing expectation of privacy.
Andrew, is my lettering backwards?
It may be. You can.
Yes,
all you have
it
to
is.
do, Gary, is hover
is.
over. You see the little blue, the little three dots.
There you go. That's better.
There we go.
You're right.
That's
Okay.
better.
There we go.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for telling me. Someone over there.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it over to you, Phyllis. I had a
Now
couple
you're
other
frozen
things.
again,
For sake of time, I think it's because I use this camera that's like 1,000 zillion megapixels.
Yeah. You're frozen again now.
I'll turn it off and on again.
Yeah, turn it off and on. Right?
Phyllis, you take it.
Okay. Yeah. So let's move on to Lawrence. And I have to say, Lawrence is a great partner to have. I love learning from him. He has been a great supporter of the controls. I'll ask you Gary's question. What should MSPs know about the guide versus following the implementation of IG1 and essential cyber hygiene?
I love that. And first I'll say, Phyllis, the controls under your leadership have been amazing. And as that continues, and you continue to evangelize the mission of CIS, like we are absolutely in line with that. It is, I have long pointed to the controls as like the easiest, most digestible place to start in cybersecurity. I have a lot of background in enterprise and all of the risk management frameworks where you have to like know that language to even start to understand, and the controls are written by humans for humans. So incredible. I love the partnership that we have with CIS, and so thank you for doing what you do and what CIS does as a whole, because it is so important to this community. But to your question, and I think so for anyone who hasn't taken the time to read the guide, go out, read it. It's not very long. It's actually a very informative read. I know for me, it was reading it and then trying to like say, what can I learn and what can I apply from this? That was where the value was. I've been in this space in the controls for a very, very long time, and there's definitely good actions and takeaways of consideration, because some of the, if you just look at the contributors to the guide, you're going to see it's not a lot of people who are geeks or technologists or engineers. There's so many diverse inputs and opinions in this. It's great. So what should people take? I think the baseline of like what is reasonable. The takeaway that I would offer here is if we as an MSP don't define what we understand as reasonable, then it's left to interpretation. It's left to someone else, and whether that be a customer, whether that be a legal team, someone else is going to make that determination for us. And usually when they're making that determination, bad things are already happening. And so the application and defining of what we feel as an organization is reasonable is like the place to start. One of the concepts that kind of gets foot stomped in there is the duty of care risk analysis. That's a lot of words, right? But and we've spoken about a little bit of it now, just in this conversation. But like considering the risk of the information, of the assets, of the business that's there, and saying, hey, I'm going to use everything in my power to make appropriate and reasonable like safeguards, define those safeguards, and consider the risks that are applied to them. I think that is probably the most important takeaway in this, because if we define what's reasonable, we define what we're going to do to secure and safeguard those things that are reasonable. That really lets us be proactive and not reactive. And really, it says it's if we kind of look at the old axiom of say what you do and do what you say, that's the takeaway here is define that state of reasonableness and then live up to it, execute on it.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
So let's kind of switch a little bit. Lawrence is the first one who became CIS certified against the controls. And please tell us about your experience as the first one through the accreditation process. I know it wasn't a smooth it was not a smooth process. So,
it wasn't. I think anyone who's gone through any type of third-party audit and certification, right? It was very similar. With the exception that this was a little more, I use the word sporty. I use that word a lot, but it was a little more sporty in the fact that this wasn't go take a test and you're certified. It was a quantification of the people, their qualifications to do the jobs that they're in, the processes that we have identified and how we apply those processes, the means that we have and take assurance for the work that we're doing inside of the controls. I mean, it went through like service delivery, documentation, spent a lot of time on quality management. You know, like going back to what we were talking about at the top of the call, you know, like that was one of the areas that we struggled with. Like we did all this stuff. Right? Like we have a very vibrant culture of just wanting to not just do the right thing, but do the best thing, do it the best possible way. But writing that down, like where we just like struggled was writing that down in a way that someone that wasn't in the situation could understand, was really difficult. But all in all, the process did involve understanding how we handled information, how we measure things, having the right certifications, and all of the things internally. And then at the end of the day, that third-party attestation that we're doing what we say that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, just FYI for the group, CREST is an organization that does certifications, most notably for, in my opinion, well, from my experience, for pen testers. So the U.S. government looks for CREST certifications when I work there to say, okay, who can we hire as a third-party pen tester for this organization? So they really go into, are you a credible business? For example, has there been a complaint lodged against you in Better Business Bureau? And it talks about ethics as well. So the accreditation is not for an individual, it's for the whole entire organization. So the whole entire organization is accredited to do assessments using the CIS controls. So then next question, one of the requirements is, of course, the SANS 566, because they're only game in town. It's not cheap. Do you think that this is a barrier for MSPs to get accredited?
You know, that's a difficult question, and I'll answer it from kind of my perspective, and as evidenced by the fact that we're so early in the controls accreditation, we're so early in the CMMC accreditation. This is what we do, and our culture is to do, right? Like to just get stuff done, but do it in the best possible way that we can. And so
the second best.
Yeah, we strive for like a number one, but yeah, it's hard. And so this is a matter of prioritizing time and resources. I mean, it really is. It's a matter of prioritizing that and saying, all right, for us to live up to our core values, this is something we have to do. And I mean, even we're a small team, and it's not even just the cost, because the cost is not insignificant, but it's living it and applying it and understanding it and getting the time to really understand what SANS wants you to understand, what the controls want you to do, and really changing that lexicon. So is it a barrier? Yes. But it's also something that I can speak personally. It changes the individuals, and it changes the organization in a very positive way. So surely worth it.
Do you do more co-managed or like full fixed fee where you're everything for a business?
So we are almost equally split 50-50. Most of our larger clients, as you'd expect, are co-managed. And then most of the small organizations, we're fully managing them. But we have one standard of care that we apply for all of them, and one customer responsibility model that we apply for all of them, even in those co-managed environments.
What is, for a full fixed fee, what do you on average target as a seat price to do all this?
Somewhere north of $275 a seat.
Gotcha. Because if you would have told me anything less than $250, I would have called BS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you say time, I think money.
Oh, 100%.
Time to do this. It takes time to do that. It takes commitment. Like, to me, you can only do that is if you can afford to.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and you know, the point that you made earlier, and I held my tongue, but I'm really glad you did. And that was in like the change management process, right? Like implementing proper change management slows the organization down. Right? MSPs are made for throughput and efficiency, and then when all of a sudden there's now some kind of review or approval, or hey, I have to pivot off of a ticket to get that approved, man, I mean, that gets expensive fast. But with the implementation of the controls, like, and I'm glad you brought this up, Gary, because it's the emotional and intellectual investment that it takes through the whole organization. This is not just a C-suite thing. This is not just an engineer thing. This is from the frontline person answering the phone all the way through the organization. It fundamentally changes how we do things, our communication with our clients, the lexicon that we use. And you're right, that is expensive. It's more expensive than if it was just, hey, we can go fix all of the blinking lights and make them blink better.
Good.
So you talked a little bit about this, but how did the accreditation process change the culture within your organization? And what was the impact on your operational efficiency, your security, your sales?
What a great question. So I'll say culturally, it was probably the most significant impact in the fact that now, like, we have used the CIS controls as our North Star for 14 years. Right? We live them, breathe them. It was written into our MSA. We defined IG1 as kind of like our minimum standard to do business with us. We had done all of those things, but then when we changed, hey, and now this is the exact process we're going to use for the implementation and the defining those minimum requirements and timelines. That really made a huge difference, because now it affects sales, it affects admin. It affects how we do things. So the cultural shift of having a more regimented process was big. The other shift, and I think this is important, documenting the intention of the things that we do, or why a certain choice was made. That was also something that was a little bit unexpected, and it actually was organic. It didn't come from me. It came from our service delivery team, of them saying, "Oh, hey, like if we include this in our ticket, like if the customer is accepting the risk, then we should probably say the customer is accepting this risk, and it's a qualified person based on." And it's like, wow, like everyone got it. Everyone was on board with it. And so that was for me, that was the moment where I knew that everyone was actually in line and understood the intention of what we were doing, not just a checklist, not just oh yeah, go do this because someone says to do it, but really getting behind it. So
How do you translate
that's
that to a prospect who says,
Whew.
you're $5,000 a month and the other people are $3,000 a month?
That is a conversation we have all day, every day, and I think it goes to narrowing the target customers that we actively and aggressively pursue. There's some organizations that they legitimately don't care, especially in the small business space. They want the lowest price, or they want a very specific feature. And like, we will approach them and say, like, if you're looking for price, then we're probably not going to be the right fit. If you're looking for quality, if you're looking for like a regimented structure for how things are done that has been evaluated and accredited by a third party, then we're your fit. We evolve, we adopt, we do these things on a meaningful basis every day, and if that is in line with that prospect's culture and their internal North Star, whatever that might be, then it's an alignment. But it absolutely filters out a lot of prospects, and it narrows the sales conversation that we have every day.
Lawrence, I want to ask Gary something. Gary,
so to that, I would say,
Gary, I still laugh at your sales role play that you did a few months back, where you're like, I'm trying to figure out why I don't want to show up for the second meeting, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
I would say like, hey, listen, you know, we normally, here's what we do in a second meeting. You're not convincing me I should come back.
but
Right. Because it sounds like I care more about your risk than you do. And I'm not sure why.
right. And
That's
I
right.
was going to ask you, Gary, would you use this early and upfront in the first call? Meaning, hey, look, there are low price providers out there. I just wanted to share with you that's not us. Let me tell you, you know, what we charge, in ballpark, what we charge, why we charge it, etc. And you know, just to kind of calibrate what you're looking for. Is that something you're going to pull out early in you know, to set the stage of who you are?
Yeah. And listen, and I've shared this, but the secret to how I've done it and taught many people how to do it is to go right to take a couple examples of pain that you uncover, security, you know, that you've uncovered. Then I go right at a high level to show them what our roles look like. And just explain to them how we've solved it conceptually with a role and what that role does and why they can't get that result without it. Because you got to paint in big, broad strokes, not in like a whole list of features and tools and stuff.
Right.
And someone else has a different long list. And you're trying to tell them like your long list is way better. And so if you can do it at a conceptual level, if you can take them through what Lawrence just said, like, hey, we consider us one of the top firms. Can I tell you a story? We just went through this accreditation process. Can I tell you what we learned and why we're better? But guess what all of it took? It took time and process. My customers are better off and we're happy to make a little bit more investment. Do you really care whether you spend $5,000 or whether you spend $4,200 in this scenario? If what I'm saying is true, if we're on the fairway, that this makes logical sense, but you have to do it. The word I always use with our members, big paint in big, broad strokes.
Got it.
So Lawrence, how did you know, we often talk on this call about the culture of security, and we talk about, you know, I think what's bringing to light in my mind with this conversation, we often talk about like the technologists, but you brought up the sales team and how you have that conversation every day. How was it with your sales team to tell them, well, you're just going to walk away from that sale?
Yeah.
Wild. No, really, it's interesting. So if we go, oh yes, Gary. What I learned is salespeople really don't like when you say no, like we can't do this, or this is just a bad fit, or there's just, you know, there's an opportunity for some revenue, but it's bad revenue. But what's interesting, if we go in the Wayback Machine, years ago, we have had these authorized processes, authorized people processes, and right, it's you know, who can make a request and what type of request and up to what authorization and all this stuff, very enterprise IT-ish. You start making application to that in mid-market, it gets really difficult. Because, you know, you may not have 3 approvers. There are very blurred lines for who can approve what and who's a data owner and all these things. But all of that, all that kind of put together, the sales team used to look at that and just go, oh, this is so hard. This is an impediment to sales. And I knew when this all got in alignment that the sales team would pull that process and those documents out on like the second meeting. And they'd be like, so this is how we go through an authorization to make sure that there's not these horror stories that happen or that are pulled straight from the headlines. Like we've built these controls in. And so it went from a not adversarial, but definitely a contentious and tension relationship to, hey, I get it. I all these bad things that are happening out there, we're not just passively going, oh, that's awful for those that are involved. We're evolving, we're getting in front of it, we're implementing processes that are risk-based, and this thing is how we're making the changes. And then they use that in front of a customer, or bring it up in a QBR and say, oh yeah, by the way, you know, like we sent that email out about this thing before. This is why, and the customers love it. And so it's completely changed our sales culture. and also our admin culture. So like now when vendors call in, that's like, and they're like, oh, we want to sell you the new flashy whiz bang thing. It's like, well, we onboard new vendors one time a year. There's a Rubicon of need. They have to align to the CIS controls. How do you align to the CIS controls and specific practices or assessment objectives there? And they're just like left speechless. But it's not just about buying new flashy cool tools. There are amazing vendors in this marketplace, but for the vendor and for our team to understand, what do they do for us? Like, what do they do for our customers through the lens, through the North Star of the CIS controls for a security function? That also is a major change for just how we worked internally.
So Andrew, there's our signal. We're at the top of the hour.
Gary is bringing it with all the different sound effects.
I love that, right?
You crack me up, Gareth. Anyway, Lawrence, thank you so much. In fact,
thanks, man.
Ed, thank you for your kind words. Said it was one of the best cyber calls. Jordan agreed, and Lawrence, really appreciate you making it one. And Phyllis, cool that you were not only the co-host but also a guest today, and sharing the reasonableness. Gary, as always, appreciate you joining. Wanted to wish everybody a healthy, happy Thanksgiving to all
for everybody in the
there.
US.
Yeah,
right.
Fair. And all the best to you. Look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Bye.